Nobody wanted the job. 3 caretakers had already failed, and 2 of them were still in the medical bay with burns and bite wounds. The Dracari hatchlings were only 6 weeks old, but they had already proven themselves dangerous enough to terrify every species on Hearthstone Station. Annie Reyes read the assignment notice for the 3rd time. She was a junior xenobiologist with barely 2 years of experience. Before that, she had spent a decade teaching children back on Earth. She had no business volunteering for something this risky, but something in the report caught her attention. The hatchlings were not eating. They attacked anyone who entered their nursery. They huddled in corners and made sounds that the translation software could not identify. Annie knew those signs. She had seen them before in frightened children on Earth. These were not monsters. These were bobbies who missed their mother. Director Webb called her into his office that afternoon. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been running Hearthstone Station for 15 years, and he had never looked so stressed. "You understand what you are asking for," he said. It was not a question. "I do, sir. The Dracari are one of the most dangerous species in the known galaxy. Their adults can melt through steel with their breath. Their venom can kill a human in 30 seconds, and you want to babysit their children." Annie kept her voice calm. "Someone has to, sir. Ambassador Vora trusted us with her clutch during the treaty negotiations. If those hatchlings die or get hurt, we lose the alliance, and we lose any chance of peace with the Dracari Empire." Webb rubbed his face with both hands. The previous caretakers were specialists, a Melori psychic, a Vanthan biologist with 200 years of experience, a medical team of 5. All of them failed. "Maybe that is the problem," Annie said. "Too many specialists, too much science, not enough simple care." Webb stared at her for a long moment. Then he signed the transfer paperwork and handed it to her. "If you die," he said, "I am going to be very annoyed with you." The nursery wing had been built to match the conditions on the Dracari homeworld. The air was thick and hot, filled with the smell of sulfur. The walls glowed with artificial volcanic heat. Annie felt sweat running down her back before she even reached the main door. A security officer handed her a heat-resistant suit. Standard protocol. The barrier stays up at all times. You feed them through the delivery chute. You do not enter the enclosure under any circumstances. Annie took the suit but did not put it on. "I want to see them first." The officer shrugged and opened the viewing panel. The nursery was a large circular room filled with dark rocks and glowing orange pools. In the far corner, 5 small shapes huddled together. They were beautiful in a terrifying way. Their scales ranged from pale silver to deep crimson. Their wings were folded tight against their bodies. Their eyes reflected the light like burning coals. The smallest one noticed Annie watching. It let out a high-pitched shriek and pressed itself deeper into the pile. The largest one, a crimson hatchling with a scarred snout, rose up and spread its wings. Even at 6 weeks old, it was the size of a large dog. It opened its mouth and showed rows of teeth that could cut through bone. "That one is Rumble," the officer said, "named by the previous team before he bit 3 of them. The small silver one is Pip. The others are Soot, Ash, and Flicker. They have not eaten in 4 days." Annie watched Rumble hold his defensive position. His wings were trembling. His eyes kept darting toward the door, then back to his siblings. "He is not attacking," Annie said quietly. "He is protecting them." Same result either way. Anyone who gets close ends up bleeding. Annie pressed her hand against the viewing panel. The glass was warm from the heat inside. Rumble tracked her movement but did not advance. "They are scared," she said. "They have been taken from their mother, put in a strange place, and surrounded by aliens who smell wrong and sound wrong. Of course they are fighting back. It is all they know how to do." The officer made a skeptical noise. "They are predators. Their instincts are to hunt and kill. Their instincts are to survive, and right now they do not feel safe." Annie finally turned away from the glass. I want full access to the nursery. No barriers, no delivery chutes, just me and them. That is against every protocol we have. Then change the protocols, because whatever you have been doing is not working. The officer opened his mouth to argue, but something in Annie's expression stopped him. She was not being reckless. She was not being brave. She simply looked like someone who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. "I will talk to Director Webb," he said finally. Annie nodded and looked back through the viewing panel. Pip had crawled out from the pile and was watching her with wide silver eyes. For just a moment, the little hatchling tilted its head, curious instead of afraid. Annie smiled. "It is okay," she whispered, knowing the hatchling could not hear her through the glass. "I am going to help you, I promise." In the corner, Rumble slowly lowered his wings. He did not stop watching the strange human, but something in his posture changed. He was still ready to fight, but for the first time in days, he was also ready to wait. 3 nights passed before Annie got permission to enter the nursery without the barrier. She used that time to prepare. She studied everything the station database had on Dracari biology. She learned that their hearing was twice as sensitive as humans. She learned that they could sense body heat and heartbeat from across a room. She learned that hatchlings imprinted on sounds and voices during their first months of life. That last detail gave her an idea. On the 4th night, Annie walked into the nursery wing carrying nothing but a small tablet and a blanket. The security officer on duty gave her a look that said he expected to be filing a death report by morning. Annie ignored him and stepped through the main door. The heat hit her like a wall. She had refused the protective suit, knowing the hatchlings would see it as armor, as threat. She wore simple clothes that would let them smell her, sense her, know that she was soft and vulnerable and not there to hurt them. The hatchlings reacted immediately. Rumble surged to his feet with a snarl. Soot and Ash flanked him on either side, their small bodies tense and ready. Flicker crouched low, smoke curling from her nostrils. Only Pip stayed back, watching with those strange silver eyes. Annie did not move toward them. She walked to the far side of the room, near the entrance, and sat down on the warm stone floor. She spread the blanket beneath her and placed the tablet on her lap. Then she started to read. "Once upon a time," she said, keeping her voice soft and steady, "there was a little bear who lived in a great forest." The hatchlings froze. They had expected her to advance, to threaten, to try to grab them like all the others had. They did not know what to do with someone who simply sat and made gentle sounds. Annie kept reading. The story was an old Earth tale about a bear who got lost and had to find his way home. It was simple and slow and full of repeated phrases that made a kind of music when spoken aloud. By the time she finished the first page, Rumble had lowered himself back to the ground. He was still watching her, but his wings were no longer raised. Annie read the entire story. Then she read another one, and another. She read until her throat was dry and her eyes were heavy. Then she stood up slowly, gathered her blanket and tablet, and walked out of the nursery without looking back. The next night she came again. Same routine, same spot, same soft voice reading simple stories. On the 3rd night, Pip moved. The little silver hatchling crept forward while Annie read, stopping every few feet to watch and listen. By the end of the story, Pip was only 10 feet away, close enough that Annie could see the way the light played across those pale scales. Annie did not reach out. She did not try to touch. She simply smiled and kept reading. A week passed. Then, too, the hatchlings began to eat again. The medical reports showed their stress hormones dropping. They still would not let anyone else near them, but they had stopped attacking the delivery drones that brought their food. Ambassador Vora sent a message from the Dracari homeworld. She was cautiously hopeful. She asked for recordings of the reading sessions. When she received them, she sent back a single word that the translation software rendered as something between wonder and gratitude. Director Webb called Annie to his office again. This time, He looked less tired and more confused. "I do not understand," he said. "You are not doing anything, you just sit there and talk." "I am doing everything," Annie replied. "I am showing them that not all contact means danger. I am teaching them that some sounds mean safety. I am letting them come to me instead of forcing myself on them." But why stories? Why not music or recorded Dracari voices or something designed for their species? Annie thought about how to explain it. Stories are different. Stories have rhythm. They have beginnings and endings. They teach you that scary things can be survived, that lost things can be found, that tomorrow can be better than today. The hatchlings do not understand the words yet, but they understand the feeling. Webb shook his head slowly. The Dracari have conquered 12 star systems. They have ended wars with fire and claw, and you are tamming their children with bedtime stories. "I am not tamming them," Annie said firmly. "I am earning their trust. There is a difference." That night, Annie returned to the nursery and found Pip waiting by her usual spot. The little hatchling was sitting perfectly still, silver eyes fixed on the door. When Annie sat down and opened her tablet, Pip crept forward and settled just 3 feet away. Rumble watched from across the room. He did not approach, but for the first time he laid his head down on his front legs while Annie read. His eyes stayed open, but his body relaxed into something that looked almost like peace. Annie read until her voice gave out. When she finally stopped, Pip made a small sound, soft and questioning. "Tomorrow," Annie promised. "I will come back tomorrow." Pip tilted that silver head, and Annie could have sworn the little dragon understood. The message arrived during the station's morning cycle. A Dracari warship had entered the system carrying Commander Drath of the Imperial Elite Guard. He would reach Hearthstone Station within 48 hours. His purpose was to inspect the hatchlings and assess their condition before the treaty negotiations concluded. Director Webb read the message 3 times before calling an emergency meeting. "This changes everything," he told the assembled staff. "Commander Drath is not a diplomat. He is a warrior. He has led Dracari forces in 6 major conflicts. His reputation is built on strength and ruthlessness. If he sees those hatchlings acting gentle and docile, he may view it as weakness. He may blame us for corrupting them." Annie sat in the back of the room, her stomach tight with worry. She had heard stories about the elite guard. They were the finest soldiers the Dracari Empire had ever produced. They answered only to the Emperor himself, and they had very specific ideas about how Dracari young should be raised. "What do we do?" someone asked. Webb spread his hands. "We cannot undo 3 weeks of progress. We cannot make the hatchlings aggressive again. All we can do is hope that Commander Drath sees what we see, that these are healthy, bonded young who have simply learned to trust one caretaker." After the meeting, Annie went straight to the nursery. The hatchlings were awake and active, playing a game that involved chasing each other around the rock formations. Pip saw her first and came running, small wings flapping uselessly as the little dragon skidded to a stop at her feet. Annie knelt down and for the first time reached out her hand. Pip sniffed her fingers. Then, very carefully, the silver hatchling pressed its warm forehead against Annie's palm. Behind them, Rumble made a low, rumbling sound that was not quite a growl. He was watching, always watching, but he did not intervene. Over the next 2 days, Annie spent every possible moment in the nursery. She read stories. She played simple games. She let the hatchlings climb over her and investigate her strange flat teeth and soft skin. Soot discovered that human hair was fascinating and spent an hour trying to figure out why it did not fall out when pulled. Ash learned that Annie would make a funny squeaking sound if poked in the ribs. Flicker preferred to sit on Annie's shoulder and watch everything from above. Rumble remained cautious. He accepted food from Annie's hand now. He let her stroke the scales along his back, but he never fully relaxed around her. Some part of him was always on guard, always ready to protect his siblings from any threat. "You are a good brother," Annie told him one evening. The best brother they could have. Rumble's golden eyes met hers. For a moment, something passed between them that did not need translation. The next morning, Lieutenant Senna arrived. She came aboard a small shuttle, 3 hours ahead of Commander Drath's warship. She was tall for a Dracari, with dark blue scales and a series of old battle scars across her snout. She moved through the station like she owned it, her claws clicking against the metal floors. Webb met her in the docking bay. Annie watched from a distance as they exchanged formal greetings. Even from 50 feet away, she could see the coldness in Senna's eyes. The inspection of the nursery happened that afternoon. Annie was ordered to stay outside while Senna entered alone. She waited in the corridor, her heart pounding. Through the viewing panel, she could see the hatchlings reacting to the new presence. They did not attack, but they did not welcome Senna either. They huddled together in their corner and watched her with wary eyes. Senna spent 20 minutes observing them. Then she left without a word to Annie. That evening, Annie overheard Senna's report to Commander Drath via communication link. The words cut through her like ice. The hatchlings have been compromised. They show none of the proper aggression for their age. They have bonded with the human female and display concerning attachment behaviors. I recommend removing them from her care immediately and beginning proper conditioning before their instincts are permanently damaged. Annie pressed her back against the wall outside the communication room. Her hands were shaking. She had failed. She had tried so hard to help those bobbies, and all she had done was make them vulnerable. Now Commander Drath would come, and he would take them away, and they would be taught to be weapons instead of children. Unless she could change his mind. Annie took a deep breath. She had one night left before the commander arrived. One night to show the hatchlings that she would never abandon them, no matter what happened. She gathered her tablet and her blanket and walked toward the nursery one more time. The nursery was quiet when Annie entered. The hatchlings were already settled in their sleeping pile, scales dimmed for the night cycle. But they stirred when they heard her footsteps, 5 small heads rising to watch her approach. Annie sat down in her usual spot. Tonight felt different. The air seemed heavier somehow, thick with things unsaid and futures uncertain. She opened her tablet and scrolled through her collection of stories until she found the one she was looking for. It was her favorite book from childhood, a story about a knight who was sent to kill a dragon but found something unexpected instead. The dragon was not a monster. The dragon was lonely, and the knight, instead of drawing his sword, sat down and listened to the dragon's story. "This one is special," Annie told the hatchlings. "I used to read it every night when I was small. My mother read it to me before that, and her mother read it to her." Pip crept forward immediately, settling into what had become their usual position, just a few feet from Annie's knee. Soot and Ash followed, stretching out on the warm stones nearby. Flicker climbed onto a low rock where she could see the tablet's screen, even though she could not read the human words. Rumble was the last to move. He circled the group once, checking the shadows, confirming that no threats lurked in the corners. Then he lay down between Annie and the door, his body forming a protective wall. Annie began to read. The story was longer than the others she had shared. It had more words, more feelings, more moments that made her voice catch in her throat. She read about the knight's journey across mountains and rivers. She read about the dragon's centuries of solitude in a dark cave. She read about how 2 creatures who should have been enemies became friends instead. The hatchlings listened without moving. Even Rumble seemed entranced, his golden eyes fixed on Annie's face as she spoke. Halfway through the book, Annie felt her exhaustion catching up with her. She had barely slept in days. The stress of Senna's report and the coming inspection had worn her down to nothing. Her eyes burned. Her voice grew softer. The words on the screen began to blur together. She reached the part where the knight and the dragon faced an army together. The knight was wounded. The dragon stood over him, breathing fire at anyone who came close, protecting him, choosing him over everything else. Annie's head drooped. She caught herself and kept reading, but the pauses between sentences grew longer. Her hand relaxed on the tablet. Her breathing slowed. She made it 3 more pages before sleep finally claimed her. Her voice trailed off mid-sentence, and she slumped sideways against the warm nursery stone, the tablet sliding from her fingers. The hatchlings did not panic. Pip moved first, climbing carefully onto Annie's chest. The little silver dragon pressed one ear against the place where Annie's heart beat slow and steady. Satisfied that she was alive, Pip curled into a tight ball and settled there, small enough to rise and fall with each breath. Soot and Ash took positions on either side of Annie's legs. They pressed their warm bodies against her, sharing heat the way they would with a clutchmate. Flicker found a spot near Annie's head. Her small form curved protectively around the crown of that strange, soft hair. Rumble watched his siblings arrange themselves. Something old stirred in his chest, an instinct deeper than thought. He knew this formation. He had seen it once before when his mother had been injured during their first flight. The clutch had surrounded her exactly like this, creating a wall of scales and claws that said without words, "This one is ours, this one we will defend, this one you will not touch without paying in blood." Rumble rose to his feet. He was the largest of the hatchlings, nearly twice Pip's size. His crimson scales caught the dim light as he moved to stand between Annie and the door. He spread his wings wide, casting a shadow over the sleeping human. His eyes never left the entrance. Hours passed in silence. The station hummed around them with the sounds of machinery and distant voices. Footsteps passed in the corridor outside but did not stop. The hatchlings did not sleep. They held their positions with the patience of creatures who understood instinctively that this moment mattered. The small, soft being who had given them safety deserved the same gift in return. Annie dreamed of dragons flying through starlit skies. She dreamed of a voice reading stories in a language she did not recognize but somehow understood. She dreamed that she was warm and safe and exactly where she belonged. In her dream, someone was watching over her. When the nursery door finally opened, it was not gentle. Commander Drath entered with his weapon drawn, Lieutenant Senna at his side. They had come for the late-night inspection that Senna had recommended. They stopped 2 steps inside the room. The scene before them was impossible. 5 Dracari hatchlings had arranged themselves in perfect defensive formation around a sleeping human female. Their scales were dimmed for camouflage. Their eyes glowed with warning. And the largest one, the crimson male, stood directly in their path with his wings spread and his teeth bared, ready to fight the 2 most dangerous warriors in the Empire for the right to protect one small alien who had done nothing but read them stories. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. And in the center of it all, Annie Reyes slept on, unaware that everything was about to change. Commander Drath had seen many things in his 400 years of life. He had watched stars die and empires crumble. He had led armies across burning worlds and stood alone against enemies that should have destroyed him. He thought nothing in the galaxy could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. The crimson hatchling held his position, wings still spread, teeth still bared. Smoke curled from his nostrils. His eyes burned with a fury that belonged on a battlefield, not in a nursery. This was not the docile, corrupted creature Senna had described. This was a warrior born. "Commander," Senna whispered, her hand moving toward her weapon, "should I remove them?" Drath raised one claw, stopping her. His eyes moved slowly across the scene, taking in every detail. The way the hatchlings had positioned themselves, the precision of their formation, the absolute stillness of their bodies. He knew this arrangement. Every Dracari knew it. It was the shield of the fallen, one of the oldest defensive formations in their culture. Adults used it to protect wounded comrades. Parents used it to shelter dying children. It was never taught. It rose from instinct, from something written in blood and bone. These hatchlings, barely 6 weeks old, had formed it perfectly around a human. "What do you see?" Drath asked quietly. Senna frowned. "I see hatchlings who have lost their proper instincts. They should be defending their own kind, not an alien." "Look again." The crimson hatchling took one step forward, placing himself even more firmly between the intruders and the sleeping human. His body was trembling, not from fear but from the effort of restraining himself. Every muscle wanted to attack. Every instinct screamed at him to drive these threats away. But he held his ground, waiting, giving them one chance to leave peacefully. "He wants to fight us," Senna said slowly. "He actually wants to fight us. Yes, 2 elite guard warriors, and that hatchling is ready to die trying to stop us." Drath's voice was strange, thick with something Senna did not recognize. "When is the last time you saw such courage?" Before Senna could answer, the human stirred. Annie's eyes opened slowly. For a moment, she did not understand what she was seeing. Dark shapes loomed in the doorway. The hatchlings were making sounds she had never heard before, low and dangerous. Then her mind caught up, and fear flooded through her. She sat up quickly, disturbing Pip, who tumbled from her chest with a startled squeak. The other hatchlings shifted but did not break formation. Rumble glanced back at her once, confirming she was awake, then returned his attention to the threat. "Commander Drath," Annie said, her voice rough from sleep. "I apologize. I did not mean to fall asleep. I was reading to them and I—" She trailed off, realizing how absurd that sounded. Explaining bedtime stories to one of the most feared warriors in the galaxy. Drath studied her for a long moment. She was small and soft and completely defenseless. She had no claws, no scales, no venom. She could not breathe fire or fly or survive in the vacuum of space. By every measure the Dracari used to judge worth, she was nothing. And yet 5 hatchlings had chosen to protect her with their lives. "What did you do to them?" Drath asked. Annie swallowed hard. "I read them stories." "Stories?" "Yes, Earth stories. Tales about heroes and adventures and monsters who turn out to be friends." She gestured weakly at the tablet lying on the floor. "They were scared when I came. They missed their mother. Nobody could get close to them because everyone kept treating them like dangerous animals instead of frightened children." "They are dangerous," Senna said coldly. "They are Dracari." "They are Bobbies." Annie met Senna's eyes without flinching. "And Bobbies need comfort. They need someone to tell them that everything will be okay, even when it might not be. They need to feel safe." Rumble made another warning sound. He had not relaxed for a single moment. His eyes tracked every movement the 2 warriors made. Drath looked at the crimson hatchling. Truly looked, in a way he had not looked at anything in centuries. He saw himself. He saw the young warrior he had been before the wars, before the losses, before he learned to bury everything soft inside him. He saw what he might have become if someone had read him stories instead of training him to kill. Slowly, Commander Drath sheathed his weapon. Senna made a sound of surprise. "Commander." Drath ignored her. He lowered himself to the ground, folding his massive body into a seated position. His movements were careful and deliberate, showing the hatchlings that he meant no harm. "The story," he said, his deep voice filling the nursery. "The one you were reading when you fell asleep. What happens next?" Annie stared at him. Of all the things she had expected, this was not among them. What?" "You stopped in the middle. The knight and the dragon were fighting an army together. Drath's ancient eyes held something that might have been hunger. I want to know how it ends." Pip peeked out from behind Annie's leg, silver eyes wide with curiosity. Even Rumble's stance softened slightly, confusion replacing some of his hostility. Annie reached down with shaking hands and picked up the tablet. She found her place in the story. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I will finish it." And there, in the dim light of a nursery built to house dragons, a human woman began to read again. Annie read the final chapters with a voice that grew steadier as she went. The knight in the story was saved by his dragon friend. Together, they drove back the army and found peace in a valley where flowers grew despite the winter. The dragon was no longer alone. The knight had found a new family. When she finished, silence filled the nursery. Commander Drath sat perfectly still, his massive form casting long shadows across the glowing stones. His eyes were distant, lost in thoughts that stretched back centuries. Lieutenant Senna stood behind him, her expression unreadable. The hatchlings had relaxed during the reading. Pip was back on Annie's lap. Soot and Ash had crept close enough to smell the strange old warrior who sat among them. Flicker watched from her rock, head tilted with curiosity. Only Rumble remained alert, though he had lowered his wings at last. "A good story," Drath said finally. His voice was rough. "Your people write strange tales, knights who do not kill, dragons who want friends instead of gold." "Those are the stories that last," Annie replied softly. "The ones about connection instead of conquest." Drath turned to look at her. Up close she could see the full map of scars across his scales, a lifetime of battles written on his body, but his eyes were not cold anymore. They were tired, ancient and tired. "I had a clutch once," he said. 300 years ago. Raiders came while I was away fighting a war that did not matter. I came home to ashes." Annie's heart clenched. "I am so sorry." "I forgot what it looked like. Hatchlings who feel safe. Hatchlings who sleep without fear." Drath looked at Pip, who was watching him with those bright silver eyes. "I forgot that our young are meant to be curious and playful before they become warriors." Senna stepped forward. "Commander, the hatchlings have still been compromised. Their attachment to the human is unprecedented. It will affect their development." "Yes," Drath agreed, "it will make them better." Senna froze. "What?" Drath rose to his feet in one smooth motion. Despite his size, he moved with the grace of a creature who had never stopped being dangerous. "For centuries, we have raised our young to fight from the moment they hatch. We teach them that survival means strength and strength means violence. We burn the softness out of them before they learn what it feels like." He looked down at Rumble, who met his gaze without backing down. But this one formed the shield of the fallen. He was ready to die for someone who cannot fight, cannot fly, cannot even survive our homeworld's atmosphere. That is not weakness. That is the oldest kind of strength there is. He turned to Annie. "Among my people, there is a title given to those who earn the trust of dragons. It has not been awarded to an outsider in over 1,000 years." Drath's voice carried the weight of ceremony. "But I see no other choice. You have done what no Drakari could do. You healed their fear with nothing but your voice and your presence and your endless patience." Annie stood slowly, careful not to disturb Pip. "What title?" "Protected Guardian. It means that you are under the personal protection of the Drakari Empire. Any who harm you will answer to us. Any who threaten you will face our fire." Drath bowed his head slightly. "And it means that these hatchlings are yours as much as they are their mother's. You are now part of their clutch." The words hit Annie like a physical force. She felt tears building behind her eyes and did not try to stop them. "I do not know what to say." "Say nothing. You have said enough with your actions." Drath looked at Senna. "Send word to Ambassador Vora. Tell her that her children are healthy, happy, and bonded to a human female who has earned the respect of the elite guard. The treaty will be signed without further delay." Senna opened her mouth, closed it, and finally nodded. She left the nursery without another word. Drath lingered a moment longer. He knelt down so that he was eye level with Rumble. The crimson hatchling did not flinch. "You have the heart of a true guardian," Drath told him. "When you are grown, come find me. I will teach you everything I know." Rumble made a sound that was almost a purr. Then Drath was gone, and Annie was alone with her hatchlings. Pip climbed higher on her shoulder and pressed a warm snout against her cheek. Soot and Ash tumbled over each other trying to reach her first. Flicker landed on her head and made a sound like laughter. And Rumble finally walked up to Annie and pressed his forehead against her hand, the way Pip had done weeks ago. His golden eyes met hers. "I know," Annie whispered. "I'm not going anywhere, I promise." Years later, Annie still worked with Dracari hatchlings. She had a scar on her right hand from when Rumble had bitten her during a nightmare. He had been horrified. She had worn it like a badge of honor ever since. Rumble was no longer small. He stood taller than Annie now, with wings that could carry him across star systems. He had become one of the finest young warriors the Empire had ever produced. But every night, no matter where his duties took him, he found his way back to the nursery where Annie read stories to the newest clutch. He never told anyone why. He did not have to. Some bonds needed no explanation. They simply were, as natural and eternal as the stars themselves.